Hey you guys, we are going to walk through how to do the contact paper in your bathrooms today. If you saw my Instagram stories, we did this a few weeks ago in the entire kitchen and it came out really beautiful. It's a temporary solution to really turn an ugly kitchen around. So you're gonna need your contact paper, of course, from Amazon. And let's see, can you see that? There we go. We're gonna be just using leftovers from the kitchen. We got 3 rolls, they were like 22 bucks a piece, and we've got at least a roll left over for the bathroom. You will need an X-Acto knife. Do not skip the X-Acto knife. This is gonna be critical for being precise. Scissors, a credit card, or something to push the bubbles out from underneath the contact paper. It's kind of like when you put a new screen protector on, you wanna get all those bubbles out from underneath. And then this is optional, it's just a sealant for around the sink to make sure no water gets under the contact paper. We did not do this in the kitchen and haven't had a problem yet, but if you're gonna be in your location for a good amount of time, if this is like a more than a temporary solution for you, I would suggest doing the sealant just to make sure no water gets underneath and bevels up the paper. So that's it, just those 5 things. Before you do anything at all, you want to make sure that you really wipe down these counters. I would suggest using Lysol or Windex to get rid of all the dust and then letting that dry before you apply the contact paper. So we are going to start with the back side here as well as the further side over there before we get into the actual base of the counter. And what we're going to do is lay the contact paper down, bring it about 1 inch to 2 inches over the base, and then we're going to go back with a separate piece and put that on top of the existing layer. One of the great things about this particular contact paper is that it does have grid lines on the back for you to follow. So typically I do not measure anything really accurately. What I'll do is just go in and kind of eyeball it, make sure I'm always overcutting. You always want to have a larger piece than you actually need because we can trim it down with the X-Acto knife later on. And then another thing is while you're playing with this, while you're cutting it to size, try to make sure that you're not folding the contact paper at all and you're not getting any kinks in it because it's going to make it really hard later on to get those kinks out once you remove the adhesive on the back. So now we're just going to get a estimate width length that we need, and I'm going to cut this piece to size. So one of the most difficult parts about laying the contact paper is keeping it straight and at the perfect angle that matches your counter. You would think it's super easy to just lay a sticker down straight, but for some reason it's very difficult, and if it's off just a degree, it's going to mess up the entire thing. So I find it much easier to cut your contact paper larger than the countertop and then overlay it. So you'll see here that I actually stick the contact paper onto the mirror and then onto the counter, and then later I'm going to cut off the excess paper on the mirror using my X-Acto knife. You'll also notice that I lift up and re-stick the contact paper a couple of times. This is completely fine, it's not going to mess anything up, but do take note that, if you're lifting and re-sticking it 5-6 times, you are going to be much more susceptible to bubbles. So now I've completely laid out the contact paper, but I did not stick anything to the counter except for that very top ledge. You'll see I stuck the paper to the mirror and then onto the very top part of that ledge. I did not stick anything further down than that because we need to do that systematically to ensure no bubbles seep in. So once you've got the entire top portion stuck, you can move on to the remaining lower portion. And if you're working with a curved counter like I am here, I suggest using your hands to move down the curved part of the counter until you reach a flat surface. If you do have a regular squared off counter, you'll be better off using your credit card to remove the bubbles. One other important thing to take note of is the space where the back or the side of your counter meets the base. So it's extremely easy for air to seep behind here if you haven't fully stuck the contact paper into that crease. So if you do have air in there, your contact paper is most likely going to crack, and then you'll obviously see your existing countertop through that crack. So to prevent this, just take your time when you reach that crease, ensure you don't have any air bubbles, and make sure all of the contact paper is really stuck in there. So now we're going to go in with the X-Acto knife and cut right against the mirror. It's really easy to stay steady with this. It just works seamlessly. And then we're going to peel that off, and we've got an extremely clean line right against the mirror. So we're going to use this process for any part of the contact paper that we have to cut once it's already applied. Now we're going to come to the corner and cut off all the excess contact paper here. Again, it's very easy to do with the X-Acto knife, but it's also easy to nick pieces of the contact paper that you don't intend to, so just make sure you go super slow when you're doing this part. Once you've gotten the sides of your counter down, you can start to get into the base layer. I've done this particular base layer in 4 separate pieces because there was absolutely no way I could successfully apply one large piece around the sink. And when there are 2 pieces and the lines don't meet up perfectly, it barely shows. You can literally not tell at all because it just looks like it's part of the marble design, so don't worry about that whatsoever. You want to make sure that you've cut a large enough piece to fold over the side of the counter. You'll notice here on the left side that there's a good inch to 3 inches that I'll use later to fold over the side of that counter. And I've laid this base layer directly on top of the existing layer that we already laid. There's probably an inch or 2 overlap, and you will again never notice that. I highly suggest doing this rather than trying to align the 2 pieces perfectly, or you're going to end up with gaps and a messy lay. Now, when I'm actually using the credit card to get the bubbles out, I typically go with a diagonal approach, so I move from both top to bottom and side to side simultaneously. I find that this is the best approach to prevent all the bubbles and kinks, and I'll typically use one hand to push out the bubbles with the credit card and then my other hand to slowly pull back the sticker side of the paper. If we were laying this on a completely flat surface, it would obviously be a lot easier since we wouldn't have the sink to work around. So anytime you have something you need to cut around, you're going to want to lay the paper on the flat surface as much as possible. So you'll see here that I bring it as far as I can to the sink, and then we're going to go in with the X-Acto knife to cut out the pieces around the sink that we don't need. And this really helps decrease the amount of tension that pulls on the contact paper, and it gives you kind of like a little bit of wiggle room to stick the paper around the curves. So this is definitely one of the most tedious parts, as there's a ton of back and forth. You really only want to cut a little bit at a time, then you're going to go back and stick as much more as you can, come back and cut, go back and lay, etc. So your cuts do not need to be perfect because you can go in later and clean everything up with your X-Acto knife. And what is important is not to overcut. You always want to leave extra contact paper. So of course my phone died as I was laying all of that down and did not get the remainder on video, but now it's the next day and we're going to go in and try to show you how to cover up this little side piece here. So I've cut a piece, again, relatively to size, stuck it directly on, got the bubbles out with the credit card, and then I'm going to go in with the X-Acto knife the same way that we did before and cut all the edges. On this part of the base, I did end up pre-cutting a good portion so that I could easily maneuver around the sink handles. And we're going to use the same technique here to place this piece. We're going to lay from kind of like a diagonal fashion, and then we're going to use our X-Acto knife to cut off the excess paper as we go. Now that we've completely finished laying this part, we're going to go in with the X-Acto knife and clean up the edges around the sink. And you'll notice here I'm laying the bottom part first because I'm going around the curve of the counter first. So like we did in the beginning when the curve was at the top and we started at the top, here are the curves at the bottom. So we're going to start at the bottom and then work our way up and to the right. Now the last thing we need to do is go back and fill in this little piece that didn't get covered. Most of the time in your kitchen you won't have weird crevices like this that you can't just fit with one piece of contact paper. So we just cut a little piece to size, went in, put it in, and then fit it even better with the X-Acto knife. And voila, that's it. Here's the final piece. Makes a huge difference, really brightens up the bathroom. For the kitchen, it was an astronomical difference. So if you guys want step-by-step details, I will include it in the blog post as well as in Instagram stories.